Chapter 8, The Rep. Our cell's steel doors buzzed open and we scrambled into the day room, lined up along the perimeter like soldiers waiting for inspection. A large black deputy surveyed us, made sure our shirts were tucked in, and that we all wore orange shoes with matching socks. He could care less if we looked alike, only that we followed orders. Unarmed, he wore an ill-fitting brown uniform. Angry eyes etched into his face. He scanned the disheveled Hispanic inmate in bare feet with disdain. He's lucky that motherfucker doesn't launch him face first into concrete, Jan whispered to me later as we ate. He's done it before. He handcuffs dudes from behind, hogties their ankles, and launches them into the air like missiles. And when they lay in pools of blood, I was certain there would be no infirmary, no stitches, and no recovery. The inmates made sense of their world through order and structure. Codes of conduct that united them against a common enemy, the deputies, and perpetuated an us versus them mentality. But really, we were not so different. The deputies too operated in a quasi-military structured institution. Their prime focus, punishment of individuals who did not live up to certain standards, who disobeyed rules, or who foolishly believed they might be human or even valuable as anything other than part of a larger machine. With uniform came a mask, a role that allowed them to dehumanize those outside their world, not so different from the Vagos. The cuts, the bite, the tattoos, all encouraged the persona that led to increased aggression, strength, and conformity. I learned the rules quickly. Each tank designated a rep responsible for checking inmate misconduct. The key holder selected by the Aryan Brotherhood, who controlled the entire prison, monitored the rep. So-called bullets enforced the rep's orders. The rank and file structure mirrored the Vagos, except that in the tank, the stakes were much higher. My first meal arrived, a tasteless, sticky clump of carrots drizzled with white sauce that reminded me of snot. I vowed my next meal would be M&Ms from the commissary. At the rep signal, we shuffled to our places. Each race sat together at one of the 15 tables. Narrow spaces separated them. The rep controlled when we ate, when we sat, when we left the table. The system functioned through obedience and precision, a simple hand gesture, a nod of the head. No room for error, for lapse or accident. No one spoke. Eating was a drill, necessary soldier fuel. The Woods ate together. No one left the table until everyone finished eating. A lone Wood was vulnerable to attack. I sat across from a tall, angular inmate with feminine hands. He lowered his eyes and reached across the table for the salt. His sleeve grazed my plate. Like a spark, the room ignited. The rep snapped his fingers and bullets grabbed the offender by the elbows and dragged him to a cell, located behind the stairwell and hidden from the deputy's view. Although there were only 6 of us Woods in the entire mix of 70 inmates, no race interfered with another's discipline. If races crossed, the results could start a prison riot. The rep's job was to enforce. Ours had a rap sheet for kidnapping, torture, and murder with a hammer. Short and stocky, he spoke little. A long scar cut into the base of his neck. A circle of inmates formed around the bullets as they checked the inmate, punching him in rapid succession in the chest and stomach for 30 seconds like a military drill. Without protest, the beaten inmate doubled over, stumbled back to his table, and resumed eating. I spent the next hour circling laps around the 50 by 50 foot tank, just to pass the time until I returned to my cell, to Jan and his ramblings about the death torture. Day blended into night until I slept. Exhaustion wore on me like a heavy coat. All around me, inmates slowly rotted, pressed together, slipping in blood and sweat, soon to be serving life sentences. Theirs was no kind of life, and yet most wanted to be there, took comfort in rules, in structure, a world within a world, none of it real. Deputies existed like fixtures in the tower, light bulbs that flickered on and off and faded to black. I had been in the murder unit for only one day, but already it felt like months. By day 2, the rep had designated Jan and me as the tank bullets. You're as big as a house, Jan explained, and a gang member. What's your excuse? I'm tall. That was pretty close to the truth. Our size made us eligible. Hours filled with many assaults and exercise. My laps around the day room relieved stress. I blocked time by counting. Soon, I had company, a small pale creature with bulbous eyes and large hairy feet. He rarely spoke and reminded me of a hobbit. He kept pace beside me, breathing heavily as if the exertion gave him asthma. Then an apple sailed past our heads and splattered against the nearby wall. Juice dribbled onto the concrete. I stopped walking, startled by the juxtaposition. "That's Mexican Hitler," the hobbit nodded to the Mexican deputy with cringed pants, a black strip of mustache, and polished boots. The deputy scavenged through the cells, kicking errant bananas, stray oranges, and bruised plums. He smashed the fruit into the wall phones so that the receiver became sticky and attracted bugs. He hates it when we hoard fruit. The hobbit shrugged as if this behavior were completely normal. Apart from the Mexican Hitler, the deputies left me alone. My only experience with abuse came in the form of deliberate neglect. I had never fully recovered from the flu, and my fever raged intermittently, making me clammy and weak and dizzy. I worried that my asthma inhaler would run out. Without a prescription to refill, soon I could literally take my last breath. The deputies ignored my request, lost my paperwork, or misplaced the forms beneath piles of bureaucratic files. Other inmates contracted viral infections, vomited, and fainted at regular intervals, and they never got relief. "You have to practically be dead before they'll do anything for you in here," Jan said. By the end of the week, the deputies transported our rep to his preliminary hearing. As he shuffled to his place on the chain, we all spotted the deputy's error. He had mistakenly hooked the rep next to a convicted child molester. Panic skittered across the inmate's face. He knew his fate already. Prison code dictated that wolves devoured rabbits. Survival required adaptation. Child molesters were excluded. No one protected them. The F-tank offered the illusion of separation, but now on the chain, in the presence of a wolf, the child molester became prey. Head bowed, hands limp, breath heavy, the inmate stumbled, as if drunk, eyes glazed and watery. The rep had no choice. As the tank bully, he had to strike or risk retribution from his own kind. He recoiled from the inmate as if the child molester had a foul odor. Silence hung heavy around us. If the child molester returned from court unscathed, bullets would roll the rep out, beat him to a pulp, demand that he ring a bell to summon a deputy, and insist on suicide. The rep might spend time in isolation, crouched in darkness, until deputies transferred him to another unit. But if the child molester never returned, the rep might still do time in solitary. At least he would preserve his dignity. Secret sexual encounters happened during church services, the only place where prisoners were permitted to mingle with inmates from the F-tank. But while some prayed and others confessed their sins, transvestites and gays disappeared into communal restrooms. "You know what happens to stretchers in here?" Jan enlightened me later that night. "Nothing good," I acknowledged, darkness pressing in like a mask. Jan waved a finger at me and said, "If anyone put his pecker in me, I'd force him upstairs and toss him over the railing." He spoke the truth. Sex offenders were disposed of in the murder unit, forced by fellow inmates to crawl on their hands and knees to the top level of the tanks and free fall onto hard concrete. Sometimes when it's really quiet, I'll hear the thud of a body.